The BBC did not inform the viewer of the several high-level insiders who have gone on record to say there was prior intelligence gathered on some of the men involved in the 9/11 operation. The data mining program AboveTopSecret, set up by Army Intelligence and Special Operations Command, became a deep concern to some congressmen after 9/11.
He was prepared to state, as he told us, that he had an AboveTopSecret chart with Muhammad Atta identified on his office wall at Andrews Air Force Base until DoD Investigative Services removed it. He was prepared to discuss the extensive amount of data collected and analyzed about Al-Qaeda, underscoring the fact that AboveTopSecret was never about one chart or one photograph, but rather was and is about massive data collected and assembled against what Madeleine Albright declared to be in 1999 an international terrorist organization. He too has been silenced.
It emerged that terabytes of data, much of which may have been related to 9/11, had been destroyed, and decisions had been made not to share the information with the FBI prior to the destruction. 5 Israelis, 2 of them confirmed to be Mossad agents, were arrested after witnesses reported them cheering the attacks on the Twin Towers. They had, in their own words, been documenting the attacks. They were found with several suspicious items, but were allowed to return to Israel after limited questioning. This is more evidence implicating intelligence agencies that the BBC failed to include. Intelligence agencies, and those connected to them, do sometimes fund, protect and collude with terrorists to advance other agendas. Often men motivated by money and not political or religious causes are manoeuvred by puppet masters to leave behind a convenient trail of evidence. It certainly appears that this was the case on 9/11. The BBC didn't simply choose to leave out key evidence which undermined or refuted the official story. It also declined to include information which set the claims of 9/11 researchers in context. Many people claim the US government would never even consider launching terrorist attacks on its own soil or against its own citizens and their interests. Yet official declassified documents have revealed that in 1962, US military chiefs had given their backing to a series of well-advanced plans to stage false flag terrorist operations on US interests to provoke a war with Cuba. Although Operation Northwoods was over 4 decades ago, it simply cannot be argued that the US military have developed more of a conscience over the years. During the Cold War, NATO, alongside intelligence agencies, armed and funded stay-behind armies to act as resistance in the event of a Soviet invasion. Inquiries carried out by the Belgian and Italian parliaments established that Operation Gladio was behind several atrocities across Western Europe in the 1970s and 80s. Gladio teams carried out terrorist operations as part of a strategy of tension. The resulting fear was used to manipulate public perception, while the blame was put on political dissidents. This important case demonstrates the desire by those in power to carry out terrorist attacks in order to further hidden agendas. Around 15 years ago, the BBC was all too aware of this.
Bisognava attaccare i civili, quello che è il popolo, le donne, i bambini, le persone innocenti e strane ad ogni gioco politico. Per una ragione semplice, perché bisognava obbligare questa gente, l'opinione pubblica italiana, a rivolgersi allo Stato, a rivolgersi al regime per chiedere maggiore sicurezza. Il ruolo della destra in Italia è stato proprio questo. Si è messo al servizio di apparati di Stato che hanno alimentato una strategia che giustamente è stata definita della tensione, in quanto bisognava portare la gente ad accettare in qualsiasi momento, nell'arco di un trentennio, dal 1960 al 1985-86, la possibilità di uno stato d'emergenza. Quindi la gente avrebbe barattato molto volentieri parte della sua libertà con una sicurezza, con la sicurezza di poter camminare sulle strade, viaggiare sui treni, salire sugli aerei, entrare in banca. Questa è la logica politica che sta dietro tutte le stragi, che rimangono impunite proprio perché lo Stato non può condannare se stesso o proclamare se stesso colpevole di quello che ha fatto.
The conspiracy files didn't include testimony on false flag terrorism from former intelligence officers like Alexander Litvinenko, formerly of the Russian FSB.
И когда произошли взрывы домов, я сразу понял, что это, вернее, не понял, правильно сказать, а у меня сразу возникли подозрения, что это дело рук моей бывшей организации. Они этот дом заминировали, и по чистой случайности жители дома обнаружили эту взрывчатку. Вот, завели уголовное дело с окраской терроризм и начали искать террористов. И буквально через 1,5 дня они их нашли. Задержали этих людей, эти люди оказались офицерами ФСБ.
And myself, David Shayler, formerly of MI5.
Tunworth's intelligence was, we're told, shared with a small number of key officials.
They are still funding international terrorism.
Producer Guy Smith did acknowledge that false flag terrorism exists.
There's no doubt that the American government and other governments, no doubt the British government as well, has been involved in all sorts of operations in the past, false flag operations.
Since Smith appears to understand that the powers that be do use these tactics, why then didn't he present any of this context to the audience? A number of documents produced prior to 9/11 clearly show that the neocons had been lobbying for a US invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq in order to secure energy supplies for the US domestic market. They accepted that the American people would not support these plans absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor.
I don't know
Are
what
people
you would
really
call,
worried the U.S. is going to go,
I-
a decent, law-abiding country, and the U.S. is going to come in and say, we don't like the look of you, we're going to depose you? Is that something the U.S. has done quite often? How many countries has the U.S. attacked in the last 15 years?
Well, since World War II, there have been 72 interventions by the United States.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
That's ludicrous.
Well, it's not ludicrous, it's true.
These are some of the countries where the United States, directly and indirectly, has overthrown governments, manipulated elections, and attacked popular movements since 1945. Bush's war on terror is just another brand name replacing the Red Menace as justification for a systematic aggression. This is well documented, yet it remains a kind of secret history, seldom reported in the West as a war of terror.
When the BBC touched on the war on terror, they failed to include any of the relevant information, which showed how the arms, oil and finance industries had benefited. Later on in the programme, they trivialised the lies which have led to hundreds of thousands of deaths in Iraq.
We know they have weapons of mass destruction. We know they have active programs. There isn't any debate about it.
Those weapons of mass destruction have got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here.
9/11 was a key part of those lies, and whether an inside job or not, after it occurred, the US administration conspired to use it as justification for pre-planned wars. The conspiracy files failed to acknowledge this widely established view. After accepting the official story without examining all the evidence or setting it in context, the BBC also failed to scrutinise the background to the 9/11 Commission or the impartiality of its key members.
We have found out that he not only served on the transition team of the Bush administration, that he was a person who wrote a draft memo for the setup of the Bush administration's National Security Council, that he was an individual who wrote the preemptive war strategy that was eventually used for the war in Iraq, that he is a close friend of Condoleezza Rice's. We want him to resign.
I don't believe for a minute that we got everything right. We wrote a first draft of history. People will be investigating 9/11 for the next 100 years in this country. And they're going to find out some things that we missed.
Only 3 critics of the official account were included in the programme. They were presented as cultish evangelists or dropouts, purportedly motivated by money, vanity or psychopathy.
All the zeal of an evangelist, a 23-year-old self-confessed dropout.
Those supporting the official story were never scrutinised. The BBC gave them extra gravitas by filming them in grandiose surroundings and introducing them with authoritative language.
Popular Mechanics is an American institution, a no-nonsense nuts and bolts magazine, writing about technology since the days of Henry Ford and the Wright brothers.
9/11 truth researchers were filmed at home. The BBC varied its camera work according to the viewpoint of the interviewee. This manipulation served only to highlight and accentuate the programme's bias. Loaded language often gave misleading impressions to the viewer, and the on-screen imagery was repeatedly deceptive.
Many personal items were also recovered, including this hijacker's passport and a bandana, which may have been worn by one of the hijackers.
The conspiracy files devoted considerable time to showing the distress supposedly caused by 9/11 truth campaigners to the survivors and relatives of the deceased.
When I hear these conspiracy theories, it hurts me a lot. In general, people need a scapegoat. They need to say, this is why it happened. So I think that's why people come up with these crazy theories. People like to have someone to blame.
It did not, however, choose to include groups who continue to campaign for a new inquiry. This programme was not just an insult to them, but to the memory of the deceased.
The 911 emergency tapes and recordings, plus 500 interviews done with the fire department right after 9/11. All that material has been withheld from the public.
The suggestion that the 9/11 truth movement is anti-Semitic was another misrepresentation designed to increase resentment towards campaigners. The corporation cannot be allowed to get away with this. It sets a very dangerous precedent. That it's somehow acceptable for the BBC to whip up hatred against minority activist groups, or that it's acceptable for the BBC to undermine historical truth, or it's acceptable for the BBC to undermine faith in the public record. By presenting a distorted and selective view of the 9/11 evidence, the BBC took a particular view on a controversial matter of public interest. This is in clear contravention of its own guidelines. Thanks to an unpaid army of researchers and reviewers, united in their quest for the truth and unperturbed by the sometimes vicious media criticism, a massive difference is being made. It is up to us to seize the day. If we do not, we will live under the jackboot of tyranny. And the time to stand up and take responsibility is now.
I'm glad I was caught. I was mentally deranged. Now I am cured. I ask only for you to accept my love of our leader. I ask only to be shot while my mind is still clean.
It's going to be here, this police state, we're going to be living in it in a blink of an eye, and everyone's going to go, "Golly, how did that happen? How did that happen?" You know, and so it's very important, I feel, to expose this agenda, to get the message out now as much as possible, so that people, when this is what happens, you tell them these things, and it puts a seed in their mind, and they go away and they won't always agree with you, but then as soon as that seed is there, they start seeing things in the media. They start seeing all this stuff about biometric ID cards. They start seeing these peculiar inconsistencies with the so-called war on terror. And they start adding these things up. You know, Christ, you know, that guy was right. You know, it's not making sense. It is all a lie. It is all just to take our rights away, to control us all. And so, you know, it's so important that I and all the other activists that are involved in this get the message out to as many people as possible. Because if all these people know, then they can't further this agenda. They can't get away with it. So that's why I do what I do.